Diane, we featured on the channel a couple of times, is a really, and we actually, I had the pleasure of hanging out with her at Jamie's workshop recently in California, which was really amazing. And Diane is a mediator and a meditator. She's a Zen master and has been teaching meditation for a long time. I won't say exactly for your Diane, but
almost 40 years.
Almost 40 years. Okay.
And it's only been out of desperation.
Yeah. And also brings together meditation and mediation as well. So conflict resolution, and really what I find really special about that is that this idea of sort of the vertical, the spiritual practice of the Zen together with the horizontal, the relational. And it's very few people, I think, that are able to bring together both of those pieces. And Diane does it in a really beautiful way. So before we ask Diane to talk a little bit about that, we're going to play a short clip from one of the films that we put out recently.
We use that expression, business as usual. There is no business as usual right now. Everybody is in a little bit more or less an alternative universe to the one they were in before. So decision-making, conversations, choice-making, sense-making, everything is altered because of the intensity of not just the threat to you, but the threat to everyone around us. So I think regarding our life as practice is the first thing. And then seeing where are the places that we actually need support. So in relationship to how we show up to each other, are there room for multiple perspectives? Is that something that we can create space for? I see some things on Facebook where there's this kind of, are people being panicked or are people not, or what's the truth? And my guess is that it's a combination of both, and that there's room for fear and there's room to be fearless right now. And is it possible to listen in such a way that you create space for multiple perspectives? Can you calm your own nervous system in relationship to somebody else who's feeling panicked? And you can simply by receiving them, not by comforting them, not by giving them advice, but simply by just listening to how they feel and what's happening. That's a practice that we've engaged in for years.
Diane, would you like to take it away?
Yes, I would. And thank you, Rebel Wisdom, for having me. I really appreciate the sincerity of your intention, and also your capability in terms of pulling this together so everybody could join today. And just so that everybody knows, I'm an old friend of Jamie Wheal's as well, and really enjoy and trust his perspective on the big picture. And it's important as we begin, and I'll take about 20 minutes right now, just to kind of notice the landscape of where we are in the conversation. So when Jamie's talking, what he's describing, if you will, is that we're in a cognitive mapping of the largest kind of scale perspective that we can take on what's happening. And we're talking about finance, and we're talking about international considerations, and we're talking about food supplies, and we're talking about crises and what will happen in different parts of the world. That takes a tremendous flexibility of mind and of cognition to participate in that conversation and to look, if you will, through the lens of a meta perspective or of a big picture. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to narrow our focus and come more deliberately into our own experience and talk a little bit about how it is that we show up and with ourselves and also with each other in different domains. And I want to begin by asserting what it is that Jamie said, which is the long and the short, I think for most of us on this call, if you're interested in David and Ollie's work at all, you're interested in what is best for humanity and what is best in our relationships and what is the wisest and the most enduring way to be with one another. And having a very deep relationship to our own first-person experience increases our ability in the second person with each other, in our relationships, with our families, with the people we're working with, and then also at that large scale that he's describing. So for a moment, what I'd like you to do, if you'd be willing, is just to simply close your eyes and scan for a moment sensation in your body. And just notice, after Jamie's wide-ranging and complex mapping, what is actually happening in your own body right now. And if I tune into my body, what I notice is that my nervous system is slightly elevated. I can feel just the traces of adrenaline, of a kind of a rushing sensation through most of my body. I notice that I'm a little bit collapsed through my heart, so I'm actually extending my heart and allowing more breath into my system as I sit and notice. I'm noticing the sound of my voice right now. Now I'm aware, suddenly, not so much of my body, but of the space around me. And there's a quality of calm that is different than what I was noticing when I first checked in. Jamie talked about the importance of our shared humanity, of our common decency, and our mutuality. The only way to realize those things is to have a deep relationship to ourselves. I believe that many of you are practitioners of one kind or another, spiritual seekers perhaps, people who work in the world, but you may also have a meditation practice. It's an important time for all of us to connect to whatever practice we engage that connects us to all that is. So meditation is my practice of choice, and go ahead and open your eyes. And just notice, if taking a moment to notice what was happening for you, if that simple act actually shifted what you're thinking and feeling. Just that little bit of attention and awareness has such an enormous impact on our experience. So what I was hoping is that by doing that, I could change a little bit the quality of your energy and how you're listening, so that we could focus more on you as an individual and more on your emotional life and who you are in relationship. So we know that through quite a body of research that human beings develop along lots of different lines. And Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence over the last dozen years has made a big impact in how we understand the maturity, the overall maturity of human beings, that we evolve emotionally. And that people who neither dwell in emotion and get immobilized or hijacked or gripped by emotion, and people versus those people who actually avoid emotion, the people who can both feel and let go, are the ones who are able to most manage their emotions, work with them, receive the energy and the intelligence from the emotion, and also thereby show up more consistently and healthily in their relationships. So emotional well-being and health connects to relational health, connects to altruism. Those three things come together. When you're intact with yourself and know how to work emotionally, you have better relationships. When you have better relationships, you have more free attention to give to your community. So that's the logic that we're working with today, that your emotional health actually has an enormous impact on what's happening in the world and the people around you. So the first thing is a practice that is stabilizing, that helps you create a sense of peace and calm. That could be prayer, that could be meditation, that could be nature mysticism, that could be knitting, that could be taking long hot baths. What is it that calms your nervous system and puts you in relationship to yourself in a way that is stable and calm? The second one is your emotional health. How are we dealing with the midbrain? Not just the fight or flight of the reptilian brain, but the limbic system, the primate brain. We talk about limbic resonance as a property of the mammalian brain, so that when we start feeling fear together, all of us start feeling fear. We may have different cognition, but there's a general sense we're so sensitive to each other because that capacity to kind of be one through our emotional sensitivities works for us and works against us. So we really want to make sure that we understand something about the nature of the emotional system in the limbic brain, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So when I come back, I'll work with that. The third thing that I already mentioned is our relationships. So is it possible to, excuse me for 1 minute, I don't quite know. Excuse me for 1 second, just because I'm getting a low signal that my power is not connected. So just give me 1 second. So I was just speaking about how we relate to each other, what our skill sets are, and how healthy our relationships are. And there are two things that I just want to focus on today in relationship to that. And one is our ability to listen and receive one another, and our ability to assert our perspective and to create space for multiple perspectives. I think those two skill sets are extremely important in the time that we're in. And then I think the other thing, which we talk about a lot these days, is Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about it, is that our rivalrous relationships. The way that I tend to talk about it is how we get into very subtle one-up, one-down dynamics. And that even sometimes when we're in relationship and we're listening, we experience it as one down. And that if we can learn how to listen and to express and listen to express without the one-up, one-down dynamics, how much gets freed in our relationships. And then we're able to actually join in our families and our organizations and our affinity groups and contribute in ways that are free and full and beautiful expressions of human beings. And that's really what my life has been centered on, is how can I work with myself and work with others in a way that we create more beauty together. And in this time, and I think it's always important for us to remember, human beings are hardwired to deal with difficulty. We're hardwired to adapt and to shift and to work with what's changing, what's uncertain, and even what's painful and what creates suffering. And so it's important that we have confidence in ourselves, and it's important that we understand that all the things that you've practiced and everything that you've given your life to and that you've cared about to now is actually 120% relevant. I can't do what Jamie does. I don't have that kind of mind. My interest doesn't get sustained in terms of issues like economic systems and trade and finance and politics, even to some degree. So I rely on my friends and my relationships to provide me with that. My husband is a former Chief Justice in our Supreme Court. He understands institutions and public policy. He understands how the political environment informs the stability of our institutions. That isn't what I do. What I do is help people get along. That's what I know how to do best. And I only know how to do that because I've had to work on myself so much to learn how to get along with others, because I'm actually a hothead and a pain in the ass. The people that know me well. So we have our meditative discipline or our spiritual practice. We have emotional regulation and maturity. We have the skill set in relationship and how we work with one another and how we create environments around us that people want to be in. And then we have, I would like to say a little something right now. I think it's very important that we contemplate our leadership models. I think there's a lot of confusion right now around leadership and how leadership should happen. We talk a lot about autocrats and the degradation of democracy. And then there's, in a lot of our groups, we have a more pluralist approach. It isn't exactly consensus, but it's much more participative. And I think we really need to understand that command and control and hierarchical forms of leadership are efficient and usually lead to quick execution. That's why the Navy SEALs use command and control. You can make fast decisions and you can execute, and everybody stays in formation and executes according to how they're trained. That's a very particular model of leadership that works under pressure when things need to happen quickly. Participative leadership, more distributed leadership, is a kind of leadership that works well to give when you need a lot of support to get things to work. And so really starting to pay attention to how we relate to leading and following when we offer leadership, when we have support, when we offer our support, when we let go of needing to be in charge. That's a really important contemplation in my mind right now. And who are the people that you trust? Who are those maybe 10 truth tellers in your life that you want to listen to? Because whatever's happening, whatever Jamie describes that requires something of us, who is it that you're actually going to follow? And what are the places in which you need to lead? And who are those people that you need to lead with? And when can you lead in a way that's non-rivalrous? Because leadership and hierarchy doesn't have to be rivalrous. That's one of the mistakes that we make, is that power can actually be inhabited and worked with very intelligently and very fairly. The question is not, do you have power? The question is, how do you use your power? That's what's important. And then there's just the question of large organizations. I was an employee for many years in the court system in the state of Utah, where I live in the United States. I was the director of dispute resolution. So I worked with judges and with lawyers and with the public, basically, to help them find alternative ways to solve their disputes. And I think for me, part of what's important is how is it that we use our creativity? How can we take, because this is an important thing when we're thinking about this. This is a big principle idea, and that is that reality evolution works by preserving and by innovating. It preserves and it innovates. It's never just simply utter change. There's always things in place that have been there before. So what are the things that we're preserving and what are the things that we're creating? So regardless of where you're working, whether you're working on your own as an entrepreneur or a coach or a person like me now who does so much of my work online, whether you're in a business, whether you're in an institution, whether you work for a nonprofit, what do you want to preserve and what needs to be changed and what needs to be new? Not just simply what needs to change. Sometimes I think that the conversations we have don't focus enough on what do we have that's working and what is it that we want to make sure stays intact as we move forward. Jamie alluded to that when he talked about not giving away our civil rights in order to get security. Like, what are those things that actually continue to matter? So in my work, those are sort of the big picture, the kind of 4 big territories. The territory of oneself, the territory of our emotions and our relationships, the territory of our organizations, and also the big picture. How are we contributing to the big picture? So I want to focus in for the rest of my time just on the emotional domain, because this sometimes is one of the shortcomings in our society, and it's changing, is that you're only generally educated in your emotional response if you've started out in a therapeutic environment and now have done human potential workshops or transformational workshops, or you're working possibly, depending on the kind of spiritual practice you're doing, you may get some emotional instruction. So I just like to take a pause here, and I want to check with David and Ollie and make sure that there isn't anything they're wanting differently from me right now, or if I should go ahead.
Just more of the same would be wonderful. And in fact, Diane, because we're a little bit ahead of schedule as well, don't feel any particular time pressure. We'll jump in if
okay.
10, 15 minutes ahead of schedule. So really feel free to take your time.
Okay. And can you tell me how long you'd like this segment to be, and I can wrap it up?
Sure. I mean, we could go for another, let me just check our thing. I mean, we could easily have another 20, 25 minutes.
Great. So what, is it okay to do Q&A with this group on the practice that I'm going to teach? Can I leave 5 minutes for clarification, or we're just way too many?
We're nearly 400 people, so I don't know if that's too many for a Q&A.
Okay, fair enough. Then I'm just going to teach this, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so everyone keep in mind that most of the difficulty that we have in relationship is usually involves emotional responses of one kind or another. It may be that we respond differently. It may be that some people in our relationships respond more and are more emotionally reactive, and others are less reactive. Because emotions always, in some ways, mediate and affect our ability to make contact and the ways in which we make contact. So how we make contact the quality of consistency, of reliability, of trust, you might even say security, the security we feel in contact, the reliability, is really essential to good relationships. I think you know this. Now, there are cultural differences in terms of how we do this. I mean, if you're living in the UK, the way that you make contact, or if you grew up there, could feel somewhat different than how I do as an American who grew up in the West. If I'm an American who grew up in the South or who grew up in New York City, I'm going to make contact in a much more direct and immediate way. It's very vigorous, it's physical. If you live in New York City, there can also be a quality of encounter and confrontation. Where I grew up, the way we make contact is there's a sort of fundamental friendliness, but there's a little more distance, right? People will engage in conversation, but they won't make that kind of energetic contact. You know, if you live in Japan, the way you make contact is extremely subtle, and you read cues from one another that people who are not Japanese can almost spend a lifetime there and never pick up. So we need to understand that the way we make contact and how we read each other can be very different based on our culture. There can be some gender differences in how we make contact, of course. Gender identity can affect it, all kinds of things. But fundamentally, good relationships are born on a kind of trust in the reliability of our contact. Is that a good working proposition for you? Nod your head if you'd like that as a working proposition. Cool, thank you. And again, you know, if you're an athlete, the way you make contact and create a sense of trust is a different kind of contact, but it has to do with that communication, that reliability, and that trust. And that's really what we're looking for in relationship. So emotion is disruptive to that. It can be supportive, but often it's disruptive. And it can be disruptive in two ways, as I've already said. It can be disruptive because on the one hand, there's an overabundance of emotion and we don't experience things in the same way. So one partner in a relationship can be more jealous and destabilized by contact with, you know, potential threats. Another person gets really worked up and hot-headed and passionate about some injustice, and another person in relationship is hardly fazed by that. It could be that someone doesn't tend to express emotion so much or talk about it, and someone else is constantly giving language to their emotional states. All these things create difference and disequilibrium. So emotional maturity, in my mind, is really the capacity, so I'm just going to define this for you in my way, the capacity to feel, to receive the intelligence and the energy from the emotion, and to let it go. To feel, to receive the energy and the intelligence, and to let it go. Not to become swamped and overwhelmed and it hijacks cognition, or is it to just simply stay away from all feeling states because they're too problematic? It's to actually feel the sensation in the body. So I want to offer you a spectrum, just this is a, so do this with me, we'll do this together. So what I'd like you to do right now is what we did just a minute ago. Just check into your body, and without naming a sensation, what I'd like you to do to yourself is notice a sensation in your body that's physical, and just simply observe it and note its characteristics for just a second. This is sensation. So what I'm noticing is a kind of a clenching in my solar plexus. There's a throbbing and a little bit of a movement. So I'm drawn to movement in my solar plexus right now. Throbbing, clenching, moving. Okay, that's a sensation. If you'll notice, I'm not giving any kind of label to it that gives it any kind of an emotional name. When I name it, that's what we mean, that's what I mean by feeling. So if I go from a sensation to a name to a cognition, that's feeling. So if I'm going to name the feeling, it's a combination of excitement and anxiety. Excitement and anxiety. Most people can only name something like 10 feelings. So if you're interested, you can get online. There are all kinds of lists of feelings. The more you can differentiate and name feeling, the more emotionally mature one becomes, right? So when the sensation and the name creates a feedback loop to my cognition, now we're in a full-blown emotion. Emotion is the feedback loop between cognition and sensation, right? So my cognition is, I'm wanting to present something worthwhile. I'm excited about that. I'm hoping it can work online. I'm not really sure. I'm not really in a situation where I can get feedback from my group. So that those thoughts are actually creating and supporting the feeling. So sensation, feeling, emotion. Emotion is a feedback loop. If you stop cognition, let's say you're feeling excited and you stop cognition altogether, you can clear adrenaline, cortisol, and norepinephrine out of your system in about 20 minutes. However, if you keep thinking, your brain will keep stimulating those stress hormones. So there's a really, really important feedback loop there. When an emotion, which involves cognition, is sustained over time, it becomes a mood. It becomes a mood. Sensation, feeling, emotion, mood. When a mood is sustained over days and years and months, it becomes a trait. It becomes a characteristic of one's personality. So you're a sad person, a mad person, a happy person, a joyful person. Sensation, feeling, emotion, mood, and traits. Okay, does that make sense? Can I get a nod if you're with me? Okay, good. All right, so this little practice is called the transmutation of emotion, okay? So what I'd like you to do, if you're willing, is I want you to think for just a moment about some kind of scenario, either in your life this week, or it could even be just listening to Jamie's talk. Just notice a scenario that created a sensation in your body. And for a moment, what I want you to do is just feel that sensation in your body for a minute, and also reflect on the cognitive dimension, reflect on the memory. And for me, what's coming up is I'm so mad right now. I'm just so mad because I have a program that I'm working on, that I've been working on for a year, that is dissolving because we can't seem to transition it online. And I'm super frustrated, and I have all kinds of thoughts about that. So what is your emotion, and what is the story or the cognition that goes along with that emotion? And for just a moment, I want you to set the story aside and just feel everything you feel about it. Take in all the sensation, label the feeling, just feel as fully as you can. And I want you to ask yourself the question, what is right about this feeling? What is right about it? Lots of times when we feel powerfully, if it's at all challenging, we have the idea we shouldn't be feeling it. So what is right about your feeling? And now I want you to notice, and if we were in person, we would do this in dyads, but I want you to notice if giving space to your feeling and affirming that it's right and intelligent changes the way you think about the story. See if you can just kind of notice. It's hard to do this completely in your own interior, but see if you can just notice, does the story change at all when you give yourself room for this feeling? And I'd like to, so thank you for just doing that little exercise with me. And if you're interested in it, in the Zen of You and Me, which is my second book, there's an outline for those steps to be able to do that. So I think right now, when we think about the anxiety and the fear and the uncertainty that gets generated with these big picture considerations that we don't have much sense of control, when that sensation comes up, what is that like in your body? And how are you working with that? And are you able to create space to really just feel it fully? And when you feel it fully and you ask yourself, well, what is right about this? What is the outcome? How does it change what it is you're doing? In other words, my advice is to people who are feeling fear is to feel it. Feel it completely fully. And as you do, then you'll notice the part of you that isn't afraid, or the part of you that isn't intimidated, or the part of you that feels absolutely existentially equipped to deal with whatever it is that comes down the pike. I'm seeing a few people shake their heads on that one. How do you feel about that? Just nod it. Do you feel like you can agree that if you allow some fear, there's more space for calm? Yes, thumbs up from Stephen. But if we don't practice it, you might not have that confidence. That's one of the reasons it's important to practice. So for instance, we're going through our day and we're getting very speeded up and we're listening to these talks and we're thinking about the future, and we've got a large map in our mind of what might be happening in Brazil and what's happening in Asia right now. Coming back to ourselves for just a moment and feeling extremely fully the sensations of excitement and of anxiety, to some degree fear and uncertainty. And just letting ourselves completely affirm and feel that in the system without cognition, no cognition, just feeling. Using breath to allow it to settle even more deeply into our awareness. And then saying what's right about it. And what comes to my mind when I say what's right about it is that things are changing and I need to be willing to change. Things are changing and I need to be willing to change. So it's very important that we practice. This time is the beautiful thing from my perspective about us all being in lockdown, or those of us who are, is that we actually have the time to now do our practices. We can do our meditation practice. We can practice with our emotions and our felt states. We can practice our listening skills and multiple perspective taking. We can get a little food stored if that's what we're needing. People could maybe cut down on the toilet paper here in the States. And then we can trust the goodwill of human beings. There is uncertainty. There will be suffering. Things will change. But there's a tremendous amount of goodwill. And I'll just end by saying that Mr. Rogers, who had the famous television program in the States, whenever people felt scared and uncertain, he would say, just notice the helpers. Just notice the helpers. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. And I'll give it back to Ali and to David.
Thank you, Diane. That was great. Your voice has such an immediately calming effect on everyone. I think we need to have a few voice tapes that we can send out to people for emergencies.
Great. Good. Thank you.
So we're going to go straight into the Q&A, I think.
Yes, let's do it.
So if there are, so I think most of the questions that we had into the Q&A before were for Jamie, because we just heard Jamie.
Sure.
So if, Daniela, what do you think? We could do sort of, maybe if there's a question for Diane now, does everyone know how to raise their hand?
Yeah, so for everybody who doesn't know how to raise your hand, you press on participants button. This is on the lower part of your screen. And that opens up a window on the right side of your screen. And there you find like a little blue hand. And when you press that, yeah, Core, I saw it. I see you raising your hand.
Yeah, we can't go to everyone, but let's have a couple of questions for Diane first, and then we will. I've already sent the list to Jamie in email, so we can kind of select from those after that.
Yeah, and I think just in the interest of fairness, I think about 10 people raise their hand straight away. So we'll let Daniela, perhaps we can choose whoever, we'll do it in order. So if you raise your hand first, then do a few for Diane maybe to begin with.
Yeah, and it may be too that with the Jamie question, there could be just a little Diane response as well, just in terms of working with oneself around it. So we could maybe link those together in a way.
That'd be really nice, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you're willing, Jamie.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is the existential good cop, bad cop.
Totally.
Which one's
Well,
which, Jamie?
I guess that's right. Yeah, who's who?
She's like, let's be soothing and reasonable here. Let's work the deal out. Let's figure this out. I was like, yes, please. That other guy's fucking terrifying. Yeah.
He's exciting. He's super exciting.
Right. So,
Daniela, do you want to pick someone to ask a question first from who raised the hand?
I would actually really go in order because the questions are really popping up in order. So I would start with Joanne and Keith. And Joanne and Keith, you are unmuted. It's just Keith, I guess.
Keith, yes, thanks.
What's your question, Keith?
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly fine.
Right, it's more of a thank you, sort of a question. As soon as I went over, I pressed the hands up. But I would like to thank Diane and Jamie. Thank you very much. It's they're coming through crystal clear. Thank you.
Thank you for the feedback.
Thank you.
Okay, and right after we have Matthew. Matthew, you are unmuted.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks for everything. This is really great. My question is more for Diane, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I'm here, I'm living with my dad because of the whole quarantine thing, and some things with me and him have come up, and I can trace them back all the way back to when I was a small child. And I guess one technique that I've tried to work with is just sort of telling him, just speaking without thinking and just sort of letting whatever comes up for me. But I often feel that I brought it up to him twice, and I've often felt that each time I bring up the emotion and we communicate about it, that afterwards I still feel like there's something there that I'm not quite getting, and it's like I know there's something there, but then it doesn't get resolved or something.
There's something between you mean?
Yeah, and I don't think he understands what it is because, yeah, I think I'm having trouble sort of communicating, or maybe I'm not. Yeah, I actually don't know.
Well, let's take a big picture. So keep in mind that humans are in this, enormously steep evolutionary curve in terms of emotional intelligence. And sometimes our older family members don't have the same skill set we have. So one of the things I would suggest is when you're communicating with him, make sure that you take a little bit of time. If it particularly says something that provokes you at all, take a little bit of time to just reflect what you heard him say. So what I heard you say is, what I heard you say is, what I heard you say is, just reflect him back, keep reflecting him back. And then at a certain moment, you could say to him, would you be interested in what I think? And then that way you're setting it up so he can listen, and actually you've been modeling for him listening to each other. So just try that and see how that works for you. I think you'll be able to do it.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and if I can just kind of add a little bit to that, because there was a key detail there, which was this wasn't just me working out something with someone I know in my life, a direct family member, but also, I think if I heard you right, sheltering in place together. So we're in a tight spot. And how does that change what our hopes or expectations of each other are? And we're all going through that in lots of different ways. I'm sure your experience could be universalized. We're all up against people we're up against. and in some respects, like the idea of practicing resurrection, right? Or what St. Paul said, he said, love keeps no record of wrong. And do we up the amount of just benefit of the doubt and forgiveness we give each other now, because the externals are so much more intense. And that idea of like, if we were going to die tomorrow, if we never saw each other again, what would I want that last thing for me to have said? And can we just be sourcing from that place more often than not? And so that practice resurrection, I mean, Dai is amazing at this. You know, obviously any Zen inquiry, any contemplative practices, psychedelic practices, you name it, there's a lot of death practices where we experience some form of dying. And can we renew ourselves in that timeless kairos, sacred time, where love keeps no record of wrong, and then re-engage chronos, which is a stock rating shit show right now, right? And just be living that forgiveness for ourselves and for everyone, which is distinct than maybe even a few months ago of intersubjective, interpersonal, adult development, communication. I hear, you know, nonviolent communication protocols. We get to something that's happy and mutually agreeable. We might just be like, hey man, all bets are off and I fucking love you. And see if we can come from that as often as not.
Thank you. Should we go to the next question?
Yeah, let's get one more raised hand question, and then we will potentially go to the list that Jamie's got already. I think probably, guys, pause with the questions now. I think we've got enough probably to keep us going for a while.
For several weeks.
Okay, so next in line is Ben. Ben, somehow I lost you. Sorry. I will find you and open your mic. Your mic is open, Ben.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
What's your question?
So, first of all, I just want to say this is amazing. Thank you so much. Rebel Wisdom, this is wicked. And obviously Jamie and Diane. Yes. So I just wanted to do that. But also, my question is kind of similar in that it's linked to other people. And so, I guess kind of some of what's already been said kind of partially answered the question, but there's also there's like, how can we can fix ourselves emotionally, and we can learn. But what I've got as I'm trying to work on this stuff is what I've got in the back of my mind is, well, okay, but then there's my kids and my wife, and then there's my community, and then there's everything else. And I'm wondering, this thing about reflecting back, model listening, can any of that be applied on like a macro level rather than a micro level? You know, I mean, like, could we do this with Trump somehow? I don't know. So some kind of comment on that, because it's about extending beyond myself is basically what I'm getting at. It's like, how do I teach other people as well as, you know, maybe I need to just let go of that. But I don't know what your thoughts are.
Let's hear Jamie's and then I'll respond.
No, I was going to punt to you.
Jamie, you go first. Come on. Damn it.
Oh,
Won't do what I want, everybody. Damn it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, and by the way, Ali and David, I didn't realize I was under time. I by your body language and your lip movements, I was like, I'm going late. So I just cut off all the happily ever after shit. So so it was just the grim assessment up front. But like, we're here because we believe there's something possible, right? And we believe there is a way forward for us. And my sense is, you know, Dai, you can unpack this in much greater detail, but like non-attachment to outcome. And there is my stand that is resilient. So it's that sort of committed, but not attached. So can we be committed to a global, inclusive, transformational conversation? Yes, but not attached to what shape that's going to take or whether I get my wins or cherished outcomes. And if we, and sort of where our stand is can be as small as, I'm going to be kind to myself. It could be, I'm going to love my family, like that great Bertolucci film, Life is Beautiful, you know, where the father and the son are in the Italian concentration camp. And the entire thing is the father just creating this bubble of love and joy around his son who doesn't even realize where they are. You know, maybe that's our stand. you know, or maybe it is, hey, this is my neighborhood, my town, my apartment building, my flat, whatever. It doesn't matter where we take our stand, just that we take it with love and conviction, and then trust that there is some ripple effect that can happen from there. Gives us that flexibility to sort of, you know, to sort of think globally but act locally. It's the source where we're coming from, and that's that satyagraha idea that, you know, I think I'm clinging to at this point. Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to do what I'm advising other people to do. And just to reflect back to Jamie, that the energy that I feel him bringing and the life force and the quality of care is expressed, what I heard you say, is in how we take a stand. And it may be that all the fine detail is washed away, but moment to moment to moment, what do I really care about, and who am I going to be? And that stand, that big picture stand, whether it's in relationship to you or in relationship to not necessarily affirming Trump, but seeing his humanity and being able to find the partial truth in how he's showing up. So that's what I heard you say, is get clear about your deepest values and stand for them.
Yeah.
So
Thank
can we
you.
have, yeah. Okay.
Jamie, I sent the list of questions to you before. Have you got those in front of you?
I don't, but feel free to grab one and.
Sure. Okay, I can have a look at them and just see if there's sort of common threads.
Maybe do with rather right there.
Yeah. So find one that feels. So there's quite a few around nature and spirituality here.
Do you have the person who asked the question?
You know, I think different things are possible in different collectives, and we need to know what's possible and find the collectives that serve and support us.
Record of who asked this, so I might get another list that does, so that we can ask people to ask them themselves, but we'll go with the first one. What do you see as the biggest positive opportunities for societal change or renewal as the result of this crisis?
Well, I mean, and this is slightly nerdy, you know, but if you think of, and David, you and I did a lap on this maybe in November when we were in London, but the sort of the notion of like, what is the infinite game that we have been attempting, at least in the last 300-400 years, you know, sort of the French Enlightenment on, of saying, hey, beyond tribe and clan, we're opting into something more universal. We're opting into that all humans everywhere, regardless of whether they look like us, talk like us, pray like us, smell like us, are entitled to the same things. That is built on top of evolutionary biology. That goes beyond oxytocin and pair bonding and tribalism. You know, it's optional, it's elective, and it's fragile. And you know, just the timings of history, right? The French Enlightenment happened. And Gibbon's Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire happened, was written in 1776, and Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and that lot said, hey, this is an interesting blueprint. What if we start ginning up an infinite game? We don't just win the finite game and put ourselves on top of the hill. And so that idea of the narratives that I think have been perverted and corrupted was the original dialectic in the American experiment, which was, you know, forget bullshit flag waving MAGA patriotism stuff. Just think the American experiment as as an ideation of the Enlightenment ideal. That it was between Hamilton and Jefferson, and Hamilton said we have to go into the world and, you know, engage in alliances and engage in markets, engage in trade, and this is the way we advance this vision. And Jefferson said, no, that is our undoing. You know, that all of those things, all of those intrigues, all of those politics corrupt us. The way to preserve this experiment is with the ideal of the yeoman farmer, right, who is virtuous and self-sufficient and community-based. And in the last 30 years, we've had a perversion. If anybody's watched that show, Stranger Things, you know, where there's that like parallel universe in the upside down, we've been sucked into the upside down of both of those. So the Hamiltonian vision of like, we need to engage the world, kind of globalism, interconnectedness. We got NAFTA and, you know, World Bank and 1% of 1% and offshore tax havens and sweatshops and deep, you know, different places, and an erosion of life and community and continuity. And on the Jeffersonian idea of like, the outside world is corrupt and we need to return to virtue and self-sufficiency, we've got ethno-nationalism and populism. And so we've had this massive corruption of those two poles. And I think as far as the way forward is, what happens if we can reclaim them? What happens if we can all reclaim and commit to the infinite game? This is all of us or none of us. This is a shared human experience we're having, regardless of borders, because obviously environmental degradation, viruses, none of those things recognize those borders. We are connected by that. And can we dust off those two things and say, hey, globalism, not intrigue, not fragile supply chains, not an oligarchy extracting capital and hiding it in havens and missiles, and ranches in New Zealand, but can we actually honor the UN? Can we honor NGOs? Can we honor our global connectedness and responsibility? And can we dust off local, self-sufficient, community-supported resilience as a key element of virtue? We have to look after we are our brother's keeper, we are our neighbor's keeper. And can we double down on both of those things simultaneously and sort of dust off that dialectic, which I think has been perverted and polluted? And can we recommit to both of those and steering our way between those two riverbanks?
Diane, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I think just two things, and these are additions, because I think that that's a beautiful, it's what I really appreciate about Jamie, is his ability to articulate these big systems and this kind of, the values and philosophy that underpin them. So two things I would say is just to notice what we're doing. So one is everybody's slowing down and having to go inward, and let's pay attention to that. So there's an opportunity for resurgence of spiritual depth and out of necessity, and we're all at home taking care of our kids and each other. So there's sort of this reassertion in relationship to those that we're most close to and intimate with. And we're also taking care of the sick and the dying. And so this quality of care that we're all our brother's keeper, which is what I heard Jamie say, we're deeply in relationship to ourselves. And for me, the spiritual, because I think the secular materialism has corrupted in some ways. What's always important about crisis is that it demands that we go deeper into our existential and spiritual natures. So I would say that the turning inward, the taking care of one another, our intimates, and also the as opposed to being completely absorbed by our immortality projects. There's something really profound about what we're actually doing right now.
Thank you.
Great. So we've got another question, was asked by Basil. Basil, if you're there, you can unmute yourself and ask it. If not, we'll ask it for you.
Yeah, unfortunately, people can't unmute themselves.
Okay.
Oh,
There
yes.
are way too many people to let this happening, because that happens by accident.
So it's Basil
That's
Stewart.
why we want the German discipline in this.
But Basil, if you can raise your hand, then
Okay,
I see
Basil's
you.
we messaged him. He's just messaged us back asking if we can ask for him. Fine.
Yeah, so I'll read it out. I've got it here. So Basil asked, what old and current ideologies and structures in the current world order, in your view, have failed and are now declining? So I think that was originally after Jamie's, but of course, it would be great to hear from Jamie and Diane.
Well, let's definitely hear from Jamie first. It's his wheelhouse, as we all say these days.
I think in some respects, I spoke to that a little bit in that last answer, but just I think the collapse of the neoliberal promise that if everybody pursues rational, isolated self-interest in a realm of material consumption, that will lead to or equates to the good life. I think that is really collapsing, and probably I would be staggered if it comes back. And so when we heard, and this has been some of the disconnect in the conversation in the last decade in particular, where you have the Hans Roslings and you have the Steven Pinkers and you have folks saying, hey, the number of people living above the poverty line is increasing, the, access to goods, the cost of things, everybody got a motorbike and a refrigerator in the developing world, this equals progress, versus what is the good life. And I think that really, I think the simplest is that the efficiencies and the materialism of the neoliberal promise is, I think, I don't know if it's going to come back from this one. And I think that's probably one of the most significant things that have been taken as, and, you know, then throw in the fusion of free markets and democracy, the idea of like the McDonald's theory of peace, you know, that no two nations who have both got McDonald's have ever gone to war against each other. You know, the idea that, you know, and the neoliberal promise, particularly in the Arab Spring, but back into the 2000s and, you know, the neocons and the invasions of Iraq and that kind of stuff, was that when you topple despots and dictators, free markets and democracy come together like peas and carrots. You know, it's the Francis Fukuyama, you know, end of history thesis. And, you know, China has thoroughly broken that. We'll say, we'll take your globally integrated supply chains and razor thin margins, and you can fuck your one man, one vote. And we're going to tell you exactly how this is done. And it's belt and road, and it's tops down, and it's directive. And we don't get yanked around by election cycles, and we don't get yanked around by popular opinion or any of that. But we're going to rock your market economy and take over and run the table. So I think there's a lot of fracturing as to things that we took as truisms through the 20th and early 21st century that are just long in the tooth at this point, or absolutely revealed as not actually accurate maps of reality. And those are probably a couple of the big ones.
Thanks, Diane. would you like to add anything to that?
I want to underscore the issue of what is the good life, and just the challenge to the assumptions that we've made about what the good life is. And I think the other thing Jamie said that's implicit is that and particularly for those of us who live in the States, where I think the over emphasis on individualism is really, we're starting to see that there's no such thing, and that we actually are going to be more mature in terms of how we embed ourselves within the larger social good. So I think that what is the good life, and how does the individual and the collective relate, which has always been the question, but I think it's going to rebalance that according to, yeah. And also I think the thing that I also really appreciate is I appreciate the sort of non-postmodern relationship to truth in this virus. You know, there's a way that empirical truth actually really has a place in the discourse, and I really appreciate that right now too. So truth is another word I'd put on the table.
Great, thanks guys. So we're going to jump between some of the questions that were submitted previously and some of the raised hands. So Daniela, can you pick a raised hand for us?
Sure. So next in line is Bakri, and Bakri, you're unmuted. Hi, can you hear us?
Hello, it's Ben. Ben is my name.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi, Ben. Nice to meet you.
Hello. So I guess it's a question first for Jamie. So I'm a teacher in the UK, and I was planning on leaving my job at the end of this academic year, so in like August. But I'm worried that by doing so, I might lose my ability to take care of myself, and then therefore be a burden to someone else if things get much worse than they are. So do you have any practical wisdom? Is this like not the time to step away from something, and is it time to kind of just batten down the hatches? Or what do you think about
that? I mean, you know, several $1 million question. You know, I think the first question would be, what was prompting you to want to leave? And is there a tap route that you can put? You know, obviously teaching is a high burnout, high frustration position, and essential. And so is there an opportunity for you to say, hey, I'm disenchanted with the way I have been relating to it and the limitations I've had, but if I get down to my clearer purpose, can I bring that back into that system, as imperfect as it is? And can I thrive on the connection with me and my students? Because they need dedicated teachers right now. So that's, you know, that would be the first do no harm, like minimal thing, which is just change your internal relationship to your external conditions. If that's untenable, you got a crap boss, or it's a absolutely dysfunctional system, and it's gonna deplete you or degrade you, and you find that's not sustainable anymore, then yeah, I mean, what's next is a whopping great to be determined. And it's going to be entirely your risk reward, and whether you feel like there's a burning platform behind you and you have to leap, or whether there's a couple of buckets handy and you can stabilize what you're doing. So this is either you know, this is either 1936, you know, Berlin Jews, and you're like, now's the time to move, you know, or you're saying, no, I'm doubling down and here's my stand because the people I lead need me.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Thank you.
Diane, do you have any career advice?
No, but I just have a question. How did Jamie's response land in you? What did you hear him say that was enlivening, or where did it resonate?
I think there are platforms I could step into. I know communities I could go and stay and kind of work for free in a much more kind of enlivening space. And I don't believe I can bring my best self to the particular job and situation where I am. And I've thought that for at least months, possibly years.
So basically what I'm hearing is that he reflected the choice back to you, and that I'm hearing you say that you're not thriving in that situation and there is a place for you to move to. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so I would say in my world that your feedback is ambivalent, and that it seems like you just have to sit with the question more deeply. You're not ready. It's not right.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay, it'll ripen. You'll know when it's time.
And actually, Carol Dweck, who is at Stanford and wrote the book on mindsets, right? Fixed mindsets and growth mindsets that people are generally familiar with. She wrote a really good article in the Atlantic Monthly about the relationship to jobs and our purpose, and how that also even extends to like finding your soulmate. But basically that it's a subtle version of a fixed mindset to assume that when I find the perfect job or the perfect person, that my life just blossoms and I have unlimited motivation and nothing sucks and I wake up every day psyched to go to work or be in that partnership. And it's an additional kind of filter on that. And so I'd encourage checking that, seeing what parts of that track with what Diane reflected. I just noticed, was I waiting for some external to light me up? And if I'm not feeling fully lit up, do I then externalize the reasoning why and then seek to shift my external environments? And that may or may not be true, but it's a good filter scan for all of us. Right?
Great.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. So I've just seen a question come through actually from Greg Thomas and Jewel Kinch-Thomas, who actually, Greg has been on the channel before. So it's nice that you're here, Greg. And Greg and Jewel were actually going to be presenting and running a workshop at the Rebel Wisdom Festival in May, which is now going online. So, and they both run the Jazz Leadership Project together. So Greg, I've just given you like a full-on intro. No pressure, but yeah, Greg had a great question as well. So I wondered if Daniela, you could unmute. Don't know, they're together on the same one or.
Yeah, they are.
Sure, Greg, you are unmuted.
Okay, all right.
One sec, Greg. I think if you guys are on different laptops, there's a feedback. So
Yes.
yeah.
Okay, is that better?
There we go. That's good.
Uh-oh. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So, thank you for that introduction, Alex. I just wanted to quickly ask Jamie and also Diane to see what your perspective is. Do you think that a universal basic income is now inevitable and necessary? Jamie, you spoke of how there's been an incredible crunch between what was moving towards 2030 down to like 1/4. I've been thinking this and feeling this for a while, but it seems to me that with the changes, not only with the current COVID-19 situation, but also because of AI and the incredible impact upon the workforce and how AI is taking over so many things that unless you have deep emotional intelligence that only humans have and necessary for a job, or some type of genius ability, that there needs to be some kind of base foundation for people to be able to, one, survive, and then two, have a base from which it's not just about survival, that their creativity actually can be enacted to then thrive and contribute better to society. So I'm wondering what you all think of that.
Yeah. Dad, do you want me to take it back?
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, my first response is, I'll just say it quickly because for whatever reason, this is just me, and I think I might be wrong. So I want to hear what you all have to say. But I just always find that money is not the solution people want it to be. But yes, anyway, go ahead.
I think that's a fair placeholder and truth. Yeah, I mean, I think there's an article in the New Yorker right now about sort of, what did it say? It said something about Bernie being proved out as the president or something like that. But it was basically, I mean, and there's lots of think pieces right now on Andrew Yang, who was the only U.S. presidential candidate advocating for UBI in the first place, and then there's been other ones, I think, even in the British papers about sort of like we've all become, like all governments have just suddenly become socialists, out of crisis-based necessity. And so to your point about the compressing of 2030 to now, yes, these things are on the table in a way that they were inconceivable in the civic political discourse even 3 months ago. And the question is how much of it is potentially a structural adaptation versus a whoa shit helicopter money at the problem that doesn't change root values or political balances or subsequent, what are we getting back, what is normal that we're getting back to. And so the idea of dignified living wage for all citizens as a substrate of civil and creative society, modern society, that's an interesting conversation that I don't think anyone's got the oxygen or sort of runway to be thinking about in the deliberate way that like people who have been champions of it would want it to be. And then there's a cynical calculus, which is that not just the best way to keep people out of prison and rioting in the streets and absolutely eroding the civil structures and societies? Interesting question, different moral and political points of view on that. And then the question is will we have enough cash in the bank to do that? As we've experienced structural degradations of the techno-economic engine that was spitting out all this cash and generating the move to robots and AI, don't know. And since we've already got all the guns and the tear gas, do we go that route as things just unspool versus an idealized long-term stable solution? And then finally is, once again, it's all fucking polarities all the time. So we've seen the nanny state, right, in Western Europe, the UK, et cetera, and the erosion of Yankee ingenuity, right? So you end up with that, and it's not, and there's even, the Scandinavian miracle is always held up in the US as an example of, hey, decent, advanced societies doing it in a little bit more of a compassionate way. And there's also evidence that there's been a backlash in the younger generations in the Nordic countries of saying, actually, that was maybe a little too far on the pendulum. And it's dampening initiative, innovation, ingenuity, self-reliance. So the question will be is like, how do we once again navigate those things? I think it's fair to say that the America over the last 30 years has gone such to the extremes, and we're experiencing all the breakdowns in that system, healthcare, income, debt, all those things as a result of that. But what is a pendulum swing in the middle that is sustainable going forward into this new landscape with the available resources and with the challenges we face and with the amount of civil unrest that will be present, is a honking great TBD. And I don't know.
Yeah. Are you thinking, Greg, that we're going that way, or that we need to? Or Jewel, how do you feel?
It feels like we are. It feels like there is the inclination, and not necessarily from a humanitarian perspective, that it is crisis initiated, and there feels like if if that is what is going to help people make it through, then that's what is going to be put in place at this point in time. But then is that sustainable? And should it be? You know, to Greg's question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But it seems like the place that we need to be is in how can we take care of our fellow citizens? So what does that look like? That looks like, you know, subsistence and well-being. And in order to do that, do we need to put that in place?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah. Not to, like, you know, add another layer of intensity, but I think it's absolutely baked into this in the US, which is that any conversations around social safety nets, and I've seen there was a fascinating quantitative analysis around US funding to social safety net programs compared to Western Europe. And they were able, via like quantitative analysis, not like an op-ed, actually distinguish that in fact the biggest difference in our policies were race-based. And so social safety nets in the US is a dog whistle issue of you take resources from white folks and you give them to brown folks. And that's why, like, Obama being tagged as a socialist, it made no sense. His tax policies were to the right of Reagan, you know, his military policies were to the right of Bush, you know, like, but that was not what they were saying. They were saying, be careful, this is what's going to happen. And so there is no, you know, and the whole idea of like socialized medicine, even though the rest of the developed world has lots of it, like those kinds of things, there's a highly emotionally charged and latent subtext to any of those conversations in the US that prevents it from being a rational public health or macroeconomic discussion. And given our current fractured landscape, I just think you have to identify those fault lines are going to be more intense rather than less intense, as there's any questions of scarcity and who gets
what. Yeah.
No doubt. And I'll just say this last thing. There's no question that race is a subtext. Right now, we're in a situation where, to use, I think that an expression that I've heard you use, the shit show that we're in, Jamie, makes this is a shared experience of it. I have a lot of thoughts for decades that I've come to on how to solve the so-called race problem. Right now, that discourse, where am I going to deal with that? That's not the issue now. It's not about identity politics. Either way, I think that what we're going through now can cut through that. We need to identify that as the barrier and move on from it, because this is about all citizens in the United States. And now we're talking globally, but if we just keep it to the United States and UK, say, we're talking about what do our citizens need in order to survive, not go hungry, keep a roof over their freaking heads, so that they can live in a non-survival mode way, and therefore be in a position to contribute something culturally, socially, and otherwise. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Hey, you guys, sending our best out to New York. I know you guys are in New York right now, so yeah.
Well, we're in Connecticut, but we're in that 3-state, New Jersey, Connecticut, New York, you know, region. So thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Guys, really good to see you on. And Daniela, we have time for maybe one more. And then up next, we're going to introduce the facilitators before we close this room, or rather open it for something else. So Daniela, could you choose the next person, please?
Yeah, so I'm going to Jeremy, because Jeremy had his hand up earlier and then dropped it and now has it up again and is in the end of the row. So want to give that a chance. Jeremy, you are unmuted.
All right, thanks. Hi, everybody. So I'm a composer, musician, and I work a lot with stories and storytelling, and I'm already doing what you would call socially engaged work. Things about veterans and homelessness and other things. And I'm just wondering what you think, both of you, about what artists, creators, storytellers, musicians, you know, creatives of all stripes can do in the current moment to sort of help create the world we all want.
Di?
Well, I just think that that doing what you do, that there's a natural inclination for music and to be able to express what's happening in a way that nothing else does. I mean, obviously the blues is the blues, you know, so sing the blues and sing it loud is what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that old Paul Simon tune where he has that line, so this is the story of how we begin to remember. Right? So telling that story, singing that story is incredibly powerful. And it can come in 1,000 different ways. And to what Di was saying, you know, there's a, you know, back to that American experiment thing. And this is not to overly privilege the United States, but more that as that infinite game articulation. You know, you figure so many different peoples, you know, West Africans, Caribbeans, Europeans, Chinese, Russians, Spaniards, Mexicans, Native Americans, everybody like crashing into this place with all of this tragedy and possibility. And the mashing and mixing of all these cultures gave rise to slave spirituals, gave rise to jazz, blues, folk, country, gave rise to all these unique traditions and expressions that have then seeded and propagated around the world. And you could make a case that like the scriptures we need, the stories we need right now to live our way forwards are in the text, are in the embodied lived experience of the last 400 years together. Mm-hmm. And it's the arcana Americana, you know, because they are all the same. The story that Di was just saying, like sing the blues, because what is the song of the blues? It's like, here I am, broken open, broken hearted, and fucking wailing with it, right? So they're all redemption songs, and whether that's Dolly Parton or Beyonce, right, or B.B. King, they are all redemption songs. And it's those songs lift us up even as we're busted open. Like that's the weird thing about them that I find so powerful, is that it's not like, oh, here's a happy song, it'll make you feel better. It's like, no, here's a song that goes straight to the fucking heart of the matter, and wails with it. This is Etta James, this is all of it. So like that to me feels like our secret superpower, and the thing to share, which is that like the scriptures that remind us of how we begin to remember, and then point the direction of us all rising up singing. So like Alice Walker said it. She said, hard times call for furious dancing. So let's lay down those tunes.
And we have to let Greg and Jewel respond to this too, you guys, because they're in the middle of the jazz. So go ahead, you guys. What do you say?
Oh my goodness. Wow. We totally agree with both of you. I would just say very quickly, in terms of the Black American musical continuum, secular to sacred. So the blues is about the expression, not the denial, not the repression, the expression of how you actually feel about a screwed up situation. Mm-hmm. And in the very process of engaging it and singing about it, you face it yourself. So it's a psychological mechanism, but it's also a communally shared experience because everybody else done gone through shit too. Okay. And then on the sacred side of the dynamic, you have, say, the gospel tradition, mm-hmm. which is about singing, a joyful noise unto the Lord, no matter, and in spite of what you're going through. So you have, both of those ways that from, again, a Black American musical continual experience allows you to still deal with the situation, express and feel and share joy, even ecstasy, in spite of and through the pain.
Well, it's like what you were saying, Diane, about recognizing the sensations and the feelings. Right. And when you can sit in that and then allow it to come up and through in whatever way it does. And that can be as an individual, in an individual place, or when we are in a concert or watching a theater performance that brings those feelings and those sensations to life, then we can tap into them and say, and yes, I connect with you on that particular sensational feeling. And that's what the arts do for us. That's what the artists bring to us as the ability to move through those sensations.
And thanks, Jeremy, so much for asking that question. That's key, man. Yeah.
Yeah. Really fantastic moment just now. Thanks everybody.